A 73-year-old British man has died and 7 people were critically injured when a flight from London to Singapore hit severe turbulence. Passengers shot this video inside the plane. It shows the debris and open overhead lockers, as well as injured passengers being stretchered off the plane while ambulances waited on the tarmac. One of the Singapore Airlines crew told a passenger it was the worst turbulence she'd experienced in her 30-year career. Well, this was the scene on the tarmac with emergency services surrounding the plane. The Singapore-bound aircraft was diverted to Bangkok and landed at around 3:45 in the afternoon local time. It was carrying 211 passengers and 18 crew. Well, in a moment, we'll speak live with our correspondent who's at Changi Airport in Singapore. But first, here's our Southeast Asia correspondent, Jonathan Head, with the very latest.
Shaken by their terrifying ordeal, the passengers were met by several ambulances as they landed in Bangkok. They'd been eating their breakfast when the Boeing airliner plunged without warning. Jerry was travelling with 6 other family members to a wedding in Australia.
Bit of turbulence and suddenly the plane plunged. I don't know how far, but it was, they said 6,000 feet. It didn't seem like 6,000 feet, but it was a long way and so sudden, there was no warning at all. And I ended up hitting my head on the ceiling, my wife did. Some poor people who were walking around ended up doing somersaults. It was instantaneous. It really was. And horrible.
The aircraft was over Thailand on the last stage of a 12-hour flight from London to Singapore when it dropped a staggering 6,000 feet, experts believe, throwing any passengers not wearing seatbelts into the ceiling. The pilot then declared an emergency and asked to land at Bangkok, the closest airport.
We currently have 7 cases of critical injuries, 23 cases of medium injuries, including a flight attendant. The rest are minor injuries.
Occasional air turbulence is a risk people know comes with modern-day flying. But the Singapore Airlines crew told passengers that this was the worst turbulence they had ever experienced. It will take an investigation now to find out whether this was something that came out of the blue or whether there were other factors involved. Images from inside the aircraft showed just how powerful the forces were that the passengers were subjected to. A rare occurrence, certainly, but a frightening one too. Jonathan Head, BBC News, Bangkok.
Well, joining me now is Monica Miller, our correspondent who is at Changi Airport in Singapore for us. And Monica, we know that the relatives of the victims of this have been arriving at the airport, and also the airlines and the airport authorities are bringing barriers in to try and separate the media as well from what's happening.
Yeah, I know. If you can see behind me, it is quite the barriers. We're not getting anywhere close to these passengers that we are expected to get off a plane in just a few hours. These are the people who are well enough to have gotten on to reach their final destination. I mean, but if you can imagine the family members and friends that came to pick these people up, what was expected to be around 6 p.m. our time here in Singapore, it has been 8 hours that they have waited to hear any information about their loved ones or whether they were actually going to make it here to Singapore. As we had just heard in Jonathan's report, several of them have been hospitalized in Bangkok. Where they have put these family members is in a heavily secured area about 3 floors up from where I'm standing right now, away from the media, to give them some privacy, also to offer them services. We did see one family member who was visibly shaken by what had happened today, and their mental health officials who are helping them get through this process. So again, we understand that there is a flight that will carry the healthy passengers to Singapore. We're expecting that hopefully to land sometime in the next few hours.
And just bring me a little bit more information, if you can, Monica, about what Singapore Airlines has been saying about what happened. Are we getting any more details?
Yes, well, we've actually been getting details on social media through X as well as Facebook. And one of the things that they did say in their latest statement was that they had sent a team over to Bangkok to reinforce the crews that are on the ground. Also, I think getting any information to investigators as they start to piece together exactly what exactly happened. But they have also said that, they have been offering all kinds of assistance to the passengers as well as their families. But beyond that, we are now just waiting for that flight to arrive, and it's a bit unclear exactly what time that will be, but clearly you can see they're going to try to, cordon us off from having access to them so that they can go on with their day. It has been a very long one.
I can imagine, yes, absolutely. Monica Miller, thank you very much indeed, our correspondent who is in Singapore. Well, let's speak now to Tim Atkinson. He is an aviation consultant and also a former aircraft accident investigator. So it's really interesting to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us on The World Today. We mentioned there, or at least Monica mentioned, that there will be obviously some kind of investigation. What form will that investigation take, given the evidence we have? Will investigators be looking at, the cockpit recorder to work out what the pilot knew beforehand? How will it all pan out?
Well, it'll be down to the investigating authority to determine exactly how they proceed. But yes, certainly it will involve gathering recollections from those involved in key roles, so the flight deck crew and cabin crew. It'll involve the recorded flight data, which usually provides an excellent, particularly with an aircraft like the 777, there'll be an excellent suite of data there, which will be very informative, not only on what was happening, but will give some indications as to why it was happening. If the cockpit voice recorder has been preserved, and very often we find that it hasn't been. Unfortunately, there are all kinds of things afoot to try to address that frequent problem, but it can provide very useful information as to why things have played out as they have. And those things will come together into a report which will address factually what happened and possibly make some recommendations to prevent a similar event occurring in the future.
I mean, we all know, don't we, that turbulence is pretty common, but for a person to lose their life and for 7 people to be critically injured and a further 20 or so to be injured, that is, something pretty terrifying must have happened.
Yes, and particularly given that the aircraft involved is a very large aircraft. The effects of turbulence depend rather on the aircraft size. Small aircraft are more susceptible to severe turbulence encounters resulting in injuries or indeed death than large ones. And given that this is a 777, clearly whatever atmospheric event it encountered was very significant. We are seeing, as climate change is occurring, that turbulence is becoming more common and more severe, and that's something which the aviation industry is trying to address at the moment.
So, just if people are watching this and are worried about turbulence and about how serious these things can be, what reassurance can you give to people?
Well, events like this are very rare indeed. There are various layers of defence against a turbulence encounter, starting at the pre-flight briefing stage when pilots have meteorological forecasts which indicate where turbulence might be expected. Then in flight, in a tactical way, they're getting reports from other aircraft ahead. They're using the weather radar and visual observations to see where turbulence might be occurring. However, those methods are not all robust all the time. The investigation will show what kind of turbulence this was and whether it might have better been avoided. But unpredictable encounters nonetheless occur. My very best advice, which I've given on, I think, every Welcome on Board PA that I've delivered in the last 20 years or so, is that if you're in your seat, keep your seatbelt fastened. That's your best protection against this kind of event. And I'm sure the investigation will focus in particular on whether the seatbelt signs were illuminated at the time and indeed possibly the outcomes for those passengers who weren't strapped in versus those who were.
Right. Well, Tim, thank you very much for that. Great advice there, Tim Atkinson, former aircraft accident investigator and aviation consultant. Thank you. Well, you can follow this story on our live page. As always, all the very latest updates on the what authorities are saying and, of course, what's happened to the victims. You can go there on the BBC's website, or you can also access it via the BBC's News app from wherever you are.